welcome from me. Those with good memories will perhaps remember that at our all-age services over the last year or so, we've been looking at questions that Jesus asked his listeners. And this morning, the question Jesus asked from that passage is, who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Who will get what you have prepared for yourself? I wonder if you've ever asked a stupid question. Many years ago, I had an interview at one of the most famous colleges of one of the most prestigious universities in the UK, some would say even in the world. I was only 17, I was incredibly immature, I was extremely shy, I was totally out of my depth, totally overwhelmed. And there were two interviewers, and they played the good cop, bad cop. I don't know whether you've ever had that in an interview. And I sort of mumbled my way through this interview. It's nearly 60 years ago, and it makes me cringe to think about it. And after being completely mauled by these two senior academics, they asked, "Is there anything you'd like to ask us?" Now, for the youngsters, who most of us probably won't do any more interviews, but if you ever go to an interview, it's good to prepare an answer to that question, because it may well come. Is there anything that you'd like to ask us? And I blurted out some stupid question about job prospects after graduation, which might have been a sensible question in some context, but in the context of these two senior academics, it was terrible. So it was an awful experience. And Jesus' little parable is prompted by a question. It's a request. "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Well, I think it's a stupid question, because he is standing before the Son of God. He's standing before the one through whom the whole universe was created, standing before the one who claimed that he was the key to receiving all the important things in life: freedom, truth, peace, rest, life in all its fullness, the key to receiving a happy and fulfilled and satisfying life. He's standing before Almighty God in human form, and all he can do is ask Jesus to resolve a petty family squabble about some financial matter. It's a stupid question. And perhaps we shouldn't be too hard on the man, because I suspect that a lot of the requests we make to God in our prayers are rather petty and pretty stupid when we consider who God is. And Jesus answers him, doesn't he, with this simple parable, simple story about a farmer who's had a very good year. So it's a fitting story for our Harvest Sunday, when we've come to thank God for his good provisions to us. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I've no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." The world would, no doubt, say that this farmer was very shrewd, and we might well agree. Make wise investments, save for a pension, plan for retirement. It all sounds very sensible. And in some circumstances, I think that would be fine. We all do that. But I think we need to look at the parable in the context that Jesus told it. And the context is that Jesus looked at this man and perceived in him a greed and a mistaken view of what life is really about. Because immediately before Jesus told the story, he said this: "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Jesus says that those who think that life is about accumulating more and more possessions have got it wrong. And much of our culture seems to think that way. Buy a Sunday paper today, look at the adverts on the TV. The underlying message, isn't it, that money and possessions are the key to success and happiness. And Jesus' teaching is in stark contrast to that. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And I think Christians often need to learn that message just as much as anyone else. And the little story that Jesus told, the little parable, is so simple and straightforward that it hardly needs any explanation. But like most of his parables, it's hard-hitting. There's a sting in the tail, if you like. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" The man who the world would have called shrewd and sensible, God calls a fool. And that word is commonly used in the Bible to describe those who don't acknowledge God, those who don't recognize God, those who don't have time for God, those who leave God out of their lives. The psalmist writes, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." And in the New Testament, Paul writes to the Christians in Rome, talking about people who ignore God. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images. So Jesus called the prosperous farmer a fool because he'd left God out of the equation. He'd made plans for a comfortable retirement, but there would be no retirement for him because he was going to die before he got there. None of us have control, do we, over life and death, no matter how much money we have. A few weeks ago, a British billionaire, Mike Lynch, organised a yacht trip to celebrate the successful outcome of a fraud investigation. Who would have predicted that a freak storm would have instantly capsized a super yacht and drowned him and some of his friends? Alex Salmon gave a speech at a conference in Macedonia yesterday, no doubt for a large fee. Sat back to enjoy his lunch and dropped dead. We have no control over when we live and when we die. We may make great plans for the future, but we're not in ultimate control. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We may not have a future, not in this world anyway. Someone said that the way to make God really laugh is to tell him about your plans. And as Jesus asked, who will get the things that you have prepared for yourself? We certainly won't. As Simon reminded us last week, there are no pockets in a shroud. You can't take it with you. I know I've quoted a story that Declan Flanagan, our previous pastor at Keene Baptist Church, sometimes told, but I'm going to tell it again. He'd taken the funeral of a fairly wealthy person, and one of the congregation sort of sidled up to him afterwards and whispered in his ear, "Do you know how much he left?" And Declan, who was always rather mischievous, whispered in his ear, "Yes, I do. Everything." Everything. You can't take it with you. It's a popular phrase. There's even a show about it. Or as Job said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart." You can't take it with you. But Christians will want to add, I think, but you can send it in advance. Jesus taught his disciples, didn't he? Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus says it is possible to store up treasure in heaven. And I don't think he was talking only about money or material things. After all, he was talking to his disciples, people who were by and large very poor and had left everything to follow him. But I believe that he was saying that investing our time and energy and money for the sake of his kingdom in this world will bring a reward in the world to come. And incidentally, we'd not planned to talk on this parable during this period when the church is inviting pledges for the possible building extension. That's just happened that way. But it is relevant. If you're a regular and you've not taken an envelope, please do so. And please consider and pray about how you may be able to help. The deadline's next Sunday. And if you can, please join us after the service to pray about this. Some won't be able to give anything, that's fine, but we can all pray. And those who listen carefully to what the Tucker girls read to us will have noticed that Jesus asked two questions in these verses. There was another question. Did anybody tell me what the other question was? Jesus asked two questions. We can let these words wash over us. Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" That's a question. And the question may have been rhetorical. He wasn't expecting an answer, perhaps, or if he was, it was the answer no one. But I think the question was also rather ironic, because the Bible's teaching is clear that death that we can't control, isn't the end. After we die, we will be judged. And Jesus has been appointed by God as the one who will judge us. When Paul addresses the philosophers in Athens, he says this, "For he," that's God, "has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." We will be judged with justice by Jesus, the one raised from the dead. What would that look like? The popular conception, isn't it, is of Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, standing at the entrance to heaven as a sort of gatekeeper. Well, I doubt if it's going to be like that, frankly. And I don't know whether we will be asked questions, but I do know this, that if we are asked, what reason can you give for being allowed in, then any answer that begins, because of what I did, or what I say, what I said, or what I thought, will be the wrong answer. Because I went forward at the rally, because I prayed the little prayer, because I worked hard for the church, because I gave a lot of money for the extension, because I preached on a Sunday morning, because I was regular at prayer meetings, because I witnessed my friends, all of those will be the wrong answer. The only answer, the only valid answer to that question begins because of what Jesus Christ has done for me. Because Jesus died for my sins on a cross at Calvary. Because Jesus reached out to me with his gift of faith, and I accepted his gift because of the grace of God. And the good news, the news of the gospel, the good news is that that answer will be sufficient. That because of what Jesus has done, then if we trust him, we need have no fear of death or of what happens afterwards, because we can be assured that we're going to be with him for eternity.